Hello, everybody. Thank you for watching The Naturalist Capitalist. I am your host, Reed Coverdale, and I've got a pretty exciting guest on the show. I've got Kim Iversen. How you doing, Kim? Thanks for coming on.
I'm good, thank you. I see you're in Salt Lake. You know, I used to live there.
Oh, really? Whereabouts?
Yeah. I lived in the Avenues, and or is that what it's called, or the Alpha? What was it? Is that what it's called, the Avenues?
Yeah.
Am I right on that? It was a long time ago that I lived there. So I think E Street, like E and 4th or something.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, back in the day.
Yeah, I live in Taylorsville, so I'm a little bit south of the city. But
okay. Did you grow up there?
No, I'm actually I'm from New Hampshire, and I moved out here after Tulsi Gabbard's campaign ended.
Oh, you're new to Salt Lake.
I am. Yeah. I sort of had a scatter graph of job opportunities on the western side of the country, and then this is just the one that worked out. So here I am.
And do you like it there?
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, you know, we haven't had extreme lockdowns or anything here, but
right, because it's Utah, so they're more Republican, they're more open. I guess, right? That would be they're more freedom in that way.
Well, a lot of people who watch me know who you are because I got a lot of Tulsi supporters. But for those who don't know who you are, you want to just give us an introduction as to what you do, what your advocacy is all about, and your show and everything.
Yeah, I mean, I'm Kim Iversen. I host a show that you can see on YouTube or Rockfin, Vimeo. I just put it on Vimeo recently. I also have a podcast. So I just talk. I started the show about 2 years ago, talking about politics mostly and current events. And I've always been an independent since the dawn of time, but I lean to the left. So I would have called myself a progressive, and I was calling myself a progressive all the way up until more recently, when I've sort of abandoned the term simply because it has morphed the meaning of it for, there's a lot of people calling themselves progressives that I wouldn't have considered progressive. And there's a lot of people who I think are progressive who don't call themselves progressives. So I have essentially abandoned the term, and now I'm just an anti-establishment independent. I would say that I am a social libertarian, but I would say that I am a fiscal progressive, or a fiscally more socialist in some ways, not in all ways. And that term also is, that has a lot of meanings for a lot of different people. I'm a big believer in the Scandinavian model. I think Sweden right now is the best country on earth.
All right. So the way I found out about you was working on Tulsi Gabbard's campaign in New Hampshire. And I'm actually wearing her shirt right now, Tulsi 2020.
All right, yeah.
And that was an interesting campaign. There were a lot of people from all backgrounds coming together. And to me, Tulsi wasn't like I don't know how you want, she wasn't a dyed-in-the-wool progressive. She was pretty independent-minded.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the term Liberty Republican? Like, that's what Mike Lee would call himself. Have you heard that before?
I have never heard of a Liberty Republican. I mean, I know libertarians.
Right. So Liberty Republican is a conservative who leans libertarian. I would kind of call Tulsi a liberty progressive. Like, she was progressive minded on some things, but she had a very libertarian leaning attitude toward a lot of things. And that was what really attracted me to her. And I also agreed with her on most things. Like, there was this narrative that the only thing libertarians agree with Tulsi on is ending the wars. And that was like my biggest goal during that campaign, as far as outreach went, was saying, no, we don't just agree on ending the wars. We agree on, the wars is a big thing, but even if that were the only thing we agreed on, that's like
a big thing.
It's like a third of the issues.
Right.
I mean, it's huge, but it goes way beyond that. It goes like to the Federal Reserve, auditing the Federal Reserve. We would like to end it, but she was big on auditing it, at least, and making it very public what they were doing.
Yeah.
Ending corporate bailouts and welfare. That's a huge thing for us. Ending the war on drugs, criminal justice reform, prison reform. everything relating to criminal justice, we were pretty much in lockstep with her.
Where did you disagree?
Well, yeah, that was actually easier to describe when I was telling someone where we disagree, because there were fewer things. So it mostly came down to economics, but we would actually agree on a few things with economics too, especially with Tulsi. So she cared about the debt and the deficit and spending. I didn't really hear any other Democrats talking about that, other than maybe Andrew Yang sometimes. But she had an understanding of what the world reserve currency was and what relationship that had to our foreign policy. Like, I don't even know if Bernie Sanders understands that connection. I never hear him talk about that.
He's been very much a one issue candidate, and to me a very important issue, but that has been his sole focus. So I don't think he paid too much attention to what was going on around the world, except that he didn't like us spending all the money around the world.
Right. So where we would disagree was mostly on things like the minimum wage, healthcare, education, reparations. It's not something she talked about much, but she did kind of mention it a couple times.
Yeah.
And what I hated is people would hear like, oh, you don't support Medicare for all, you don't want everyone to have healthcare. And I'm like, no, that's not where I'm coming from. The reason I am not a fan of these centralized programs is because we've had, a great example over the last year, how the federal government funds things and where their priorities are. So, Medicare for all, a lot of people, they make the distinction. It's paying for insurance. It's not providing healthcare. It's just paying for your insurance. And I say, okay, but they were supposed to pay us $600 a piece with this last giant stimulus bill that came through, and look at everything that got piled into it.
Yeah.
And the people who are supposedly supporting the progressive cause, they pretty much all of them like caved and voted for that bill. I mean, Tulsi and Rashida Tlaib were the only two Democrats to vote against it. And the same with the CARES Act, like every giant disgusting bill that's come down the pipe, they don't stand their ground and say, no, this needs to be pure. This needs to actually go for it. And then they, this thing with the force the vote that's been going on with Jimmy Dore and, trying to force these people to make their position obvious. They don't even do that. So my point would be, even if I thought this were a good idea, the execution is where I see it lacking.
What do you think? I mean, what would you prefer? Because going back to the old way obviously was pretty devastating for a lot of people, myself included. I could not get insured. And my little niece, she couldn't get insured either because she was born with a heart condition, even though everybody in her family was insured. And her dad tried, he had to start his own company after he got laid off. And he was able to get insurance for everyone else, except the insurance company rejected her. At the age of 5, she couldn't get any insurance. And that was obviously extremely devastating. So what would you, he had to actually, in that situation, had to pack up his entire family and move to a different state that would give them the insurance, but that ripped them away from their family. That broke up families. So what would you suggest is the better way forward for medical? We can't certainly go, certainly you can't think we should just go back to the way it was.
No, but I mean, and I also think it sucks the way it is. I don't think any American really thinks our healthcare system works well.
Right.
Now.
Right.
I guess what I don't think is that there is just a cut and dry blanket solution that is going to solve all the problems right away, and thinking that way isn't too productive maybe. But I think the problems are, you have all these pharmaceutical companies and all these insurance companies that are protected by the government. They're given government licensed monopolies so that they can raise the prices of medicine as high as they want. There's like zero competition at all. That's why people go to Mexico to get an operation or to get or something, because they can't here. So, this is a huge, this is something I talk about all the time, but, we're America, the home of free market capitalism. There's like zero free market capitalism in the healthcare industry. It's just corporate profiteering enabled by the government that allows them to jack the prices up as high as they want. And it, with a lot of these policies that we implement, it backs the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies and makes them easier to protect their own investments and raise the prices as high as they want, and we get screwed. So I think the first thing is addressing the cost, not the price. Like we could potentially fix the price and just pay for everything, but the cost isn't coming down at all. We're just throwing money at it. And just like with college, with student loans, just like the colleges keep raising the prices and profiteering off the students, that's what's going on with the Medicare system. So I think, I'm not a big fan of all these 3-letter acronym institutions we have, and they're supposedly there to protect us and to make sure that the drugs we're using are healthy. I mean, our system is just so rotten and so full of corruption and so full of cronyism. To me, we just have to start over. Like we have to eliminate all these protections that all these companies have, and we need to start auditing everything and dismantling the entire system. Because if we go straight from here to Medicare for all or something like that, it seems to me like they're not going to eliminate all the cronyism and all the baggage that's already there, regardless of what they're telling us they're going to do.
Right.
Because, like I said, they never stand their ground. They never vote the way they're supposed to.
Do you think they would potentially if the government is the one footing the bill? I mean, right now it's the people footing the bill or employers footing the bill, which to me is the oddest system. I can't imagine how anyone in 2021 with half a brain could think that it's a good idea to have it be supplied by an employer. I mean, that's just odd. It's like, could you imagine if child education was tied to employment and you lost your job and your kids had to get out of school? I mean, that's crazy, right? Like so clearly, I think a system that is employer-based insurance is odd. When you just think about it from like, if we did have to start over and we were creating a society of our own, let's say you and I go off and we decide, okay, let's create this utopia somewhere in the middle of Utah, right? And which I think there are some polygamists that have done that at some point. I can make these jokes. I'm a Mormon. Anyway.
I can't, I'm not, so.
Yeah, I am a Mormon, technically. So I can make the joke. But if let's say we were to do this, I mean, do you think you and I would come up with this idea of healthcare should be something that's tied to employment? Like your employer offers you your healthcare and that's the only way you get it. So if you happen to be somehow, unemployed suddenly, or you're straight out of college and you can't, you're looking for a job, or the economy tanks, or, something happens, right? And jobs go by the wayside, that's an odd, I don't know if you and I would come up with that system, right?
But I mean, wasn't that from price controls in the 1950s after World War II? So you weren't allowed to pay certain wages. So the government basically caused the companies to have to come up with incentives for people to get hired.
Right.
That's where it comes from, right? So.
Yeah, it was considered, these are perks in order for you to take one job over another. And so they would offer you these incentives to come work for them. But health is kind of an odd incentive to come work for somebody, right? To say, well, if you come work for me, then, I'll keep you healthy. That it seems like, I just think if anyone were starting a brand new society from scratch, no matter who they are, where they sit on the aisle, I just don't know if anybody would come up with that plan. Maybe a plan where we all have to pay for it ourselves. I think that makes more logical sense actually than tying it to your job. But then, that kind of creates a situation where your employer would then tie it to the job because they would say, hey, I'll take this bill off your back. It's kind of like, imagine if all cars were tied to employment. Like you could only get a car if your company provided it, right? We don't live, or a house, housing is tied to employment. Education is tied to, I mean, these are things that, and then it forces small businesses to have to try to compete in that way, which is very difficult to do. So it kills almost entrepreneurship, and it kills growth of small businesses, because how can a small business compete and gain top level talent if they're not able to provide, all of these perks? So, it is totally, antithetical to innovation and growth. So, it is, definitely I do understand, believe me, this idea that, well, the government sucks at running things, because they do often. They don't suck at running the military though. So there are sectors where the government excels. We have the best military in the world, right? We spend gobs of money on it and they prioritize it. So I see an example of the government actually doing a phenomenal job with something. Even though I'm against how much spending they do, and even though I'm against all of the wars that are all around the world and all that, I still can recognize we have the best military in the world, and it's run by the government.
Is it best run for how much money we spend on it though? I mean, isn't there a ton of waste and a ton of
yeah, there's a ton of waste, right? So that's where I think if the government is, but that's because of the private contracting that the government does do, right? So the government doesn't, which I'm actually against. I actually don't think that we should be privatizing any of our weaponry. So when we say we go to Boeing or we go to Lockheed Martin, right, or Raytheon, and we say, hey, build us some stuff. And then these companies are able to go and sell those same things and that same technology to other countries. That to me is treason, or a form of it. I mean, it's definitely, I don't know how we're allowing that to happen around the world, how it should never, our technology and our weaponry shouldn't get in the hands of any other country in the world. I don't care if they're our best friend, they shouldn't have it. So that is the type of stuff that I think should be actually taken back into the government, under the government. Then people say, well, then we wouldn't have the best military in the world, because the reason why we do is because these private companies are able to bid for the contracts. But I say, I'm totally fine with them hiring away these engineers and paying them boatloads of money, because I think that would still be cheaper than paying the private companies, the amount of money for these inflated government contracts. If we just hired away their engineers, we figure out Boeing's paying their top engineer, let's say $5-10 million bucks. Well, let's give them 20 million. It's still cheaper for us to do it that way.
Right.
To say you are incentivized to come, the government job is the best job you could get. And it only would be the top, the best and the brightest that would get that job. And they would work on the best, they would then do the best innovating, and we put the money in there rather than outsourcing it. So I think it's the outsourcing that actually inflates the price. And that's the problem with the healthcare system as well, is that it's outsourced, which has inflated the price. Unlike the UK, when we talk about socialized medicine, I mean, they do full on socialized medicine in the UK. It's not just Medicare for all. It's actually the government runs the hospitals, the doctors, and the nurses. And I don't see anybody in the UK complaining about their healthcare quality. I mean, I don't think the Brits are like suffering and not getting the brain surgeries they need and not getting the heart transplants. And I mean, I think they're getting all of that same innovation. But one thing that they have a private on top of public that's available for the wealthier people in England. They're able to buy a supplemental private insurance that allows them luxuries like private rooms when you're having your baby or when you're getting surgery, or, you get 4 days in the hospital after having your kid rather than 2, or, they can pay on in addition. And I think that's a smart plan, but they're able to keep their costs low for all of their stuff because it's not outsourced to a private company that can then inflate the government contracts. And that's the issue we have with the military. And that's fundamentally the issue we have with the healthcare system. So I actually think, for me personally, I would actually prefer a fully government controlled system that cannot outsource anything, because that's when the inflation comes in. And I think that in order to get the best and the brightest, we have to agree as a society that we will pay top dollar for the best doctors, the best researchers, the best engineers, that the best job you can get in this country is that government job, to be the biggest and better innovator, and that we give them carte blanche. That's what China does. Actually, in China, the country, the government scientists and the government engineers have the best job in the country and the most freedom for innovation in the entire country. So, because the government says, here, just go do it. We just need this done, keep it under wraps. It's top secret, but whatever. They're going to they do some really crazy stuff over there. But so I think, if we were to move it under full government, we would actually see less bloat. And then but then I'm a big person on choice, freedom and choice. So you should have, I don't believe in eliminating private hospitals or private insurance or private anything. You should still have that choice. Same thing with school. We do that with education. We say, you will always be able to send your kid to school. You don't ever have to worry about that. It might not be the school you want or the exact education you want for your kid, but your kid will have a place to go and get some kind of education. I went to the worst education system in the country, one of the worst. And I think I turned out okay. You know, I think I'm still smart. So, and I came from literally like, I think it's ranked 49th in the whole country. It was the worst education system. No offense to the Boise education system, but I think it wasn't so great. So, you know, but you should still have, we still have a choice. You can still take your kid and put him in private school, right? You don't get to then take your tax dollars with you. The tax dollars stay in the public system. But if you want, because you have the luxury and the ability, you can take your kid to a private school. And so that's how the UK kind of does it with hospitals and medical. And I mean, you could even do that with, let's say, security. I mean, you have the police that'll come when you call 911. If you can afford private security, you are at liberty to go and contract for that.
Yeah. So, I mean, we could talk about healthcare this entire episode.
Right.
But this actually is kind of pertinent to my point, is that, you know, we're talking about ideals that the US government should be, and it's what the US government isn't. The government that we have doesn't care about us at all. It
right.
cares about its donors, it cares
right.
about all these corporations. So what we should be doing is trying to remove the people who are in power now, and then you and I could have this argument after that's done, because it's a completely moot point at the moment, right? Because all the people in power don't want any of the, you know, the ideals that we'd be looking for, whether it's like a more free market system that I want or a more socialist system that you want. Both of them are going to be tainted by who is in control right now. So
yeah.
the priority is removing them and getting people who are actually going to do what the people want them to do, right?
Well, I don't know if that's going to work. I think that what we have to do is remove money out of politics. So I don't think it's the person. I think any single person is corruptible. I think you're corruptible. And I think I'm corruptible. I think everybody's corruptible. And I think it's naive for us to think we're not, right? I think the human condition, unfortunately, is very fragile. And I think all of us have the propensity to become animals who riot and commit atrocious acts. And I think all of us have the propensity to become corrupted people. Everybody's got a, you know, some people easier than others for sure. But nonetheless, I think we all have those moments where we potentially could become animalistic or greedy, or, you know, we just got those, the gluttony and all of that stuff. So like all of us, we have all of us have the propensity to become fat, you know, and lazy and all this. So I don't know if removing the people and putting in new people is going to work. When especially I look at somebody like AOC, who, you know, for people that were on, you know, more on my side of the aisle, really were hopeful with her that she would actually go in there and shake shit up and like say, okay, we're gonna get the money out. We're gonna call out all the money and call out all the people that are in the pocket of donors, and we're gonna go and do this. And that's just not what she did for a minute when she got there. But then that quickly ended when she had a nice talking to by Mama Bear, Nancy Pelosi, who basically sat her down and said, listen, stop fighting with me, fight the Republicans. We need to go after a common enemy rather than each other. So why don't you go after Republicans and the white supremacy happening in the Republican Party? That's the big enemy. And AOC was she was able to be essentially corrupted. And I don't think by big money donors, but I think by fame. And I think that the feeling of fame, getting magazine covers, being a trendsetter, tweeting and having everybody pay attention has gone to her head. And that now has created a situation where she doesn't want to lose her power. And that's what really fundamentally comes down to all of these politicians, is it's not so much about, you know, their big money donors they're keeping them in power, and all of them have tasted power and they love it and they don't want to lose it. They don't want to go back to their regular civilian lifestyle. And so I don't know if removing the people is going to help so much as removing the money and the donors. Then we will have an issue of dealing with sort of the issue of fame, right? And how these politicians are able to be famous. And that'll be where we then as people say, you know what, the fame has gone to your head and we're getting you out of there. But that's a lot easier to do if they're not backed by big money. When they're backed by big money, it's really hard to get them out because they can spend endless money to keep their message on track and ours buried. And we see what they've been able to do with big tech. I mean, I don't think big tech gives one iota about viewpoints and censoring those viewpoints. I don't think that's actually big tech doesn't care, but their politicians care. The people protecting them care. And if they want to continue to be protected or to protect themselves from the threat of those in power, they have to do what those in power want. And the people in power, you know, Nancy Pelosi wants YouTube and Google to censor any negative content about her in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
And so they do, not because it's good for them. It's not good for them. It's not good for their business. There's nothing free market good about big tech censoring or deplatforming people. It's bad for them, actually, right? But they do it to protect their investment, and that is the politicians. So it's a lot easier for us to get rid of people if they're not backed by big money. So I think we have to get rid of the money.
Yeah, I want to talk about the money. I mean, you just kind of exemplified it with talking about big tech. It's a two-way street, right? In my mind, we have to also end the control the government has over the economy. They shouldn't be able to bail out all these businesses. You know, they shouldn't be able to. We were just talking about healthcare earlier with pharmaceutical companies, you know, protecting their monopolies on medicine. None of this should be legal in the first place, because if you just remove one side, like let's say we institute some sort of campaign finance reform or we ban lobbying or something, it seems like they're going to find a way around whatever blockades we put in, getting dark money to people that's not transparent to the rest of the country. So in my mind, you know, we have to attack it from both sides. I'm a fan of campaign finance reform, but as long as the government has all this control over the economy and picking winners and losers and, you know, striking certain companies down. I mean, that's what's been going on with the lockdowns. You know, certain companies are allowed to stay open, other ones are forced to shut down. As long as the government has that power, there's always going to be some form of lobbying that's going to try to circumnavigate whatever obstructions we put in place.
But if we were able to get the money out of politics and say you can't be funded, your campaigns can no longer be funded in this way, then it would be easier for us as voters to select candidates who maybe share that worldview. You know, candidates that say, look, we've got, you know, because at that point, because what you're talking about is regulation versus deregulation, or like government subsidies or government social, you know, government welfare, right? You're talking about those things. And those are more ideological, actually. So some people will believe that, no, the government needs to incentivize and the government needs to be involved. And others will say, no, we just want total free market. We don't want government intervention at all. That is really ideological. And I think it's fair for us to have those ideological debates and for us to vote on candidates based on those ideologies. But we can't do that when when those candidates are buried and their messages are buried by big donors, because really you and I don't get to select candidates based on ideology. We're instead essentially shoved candidates that are what the corporations want. They're in control. The corporations control our government. And until we can end the corporation really running our government, controlling our government, you and I can't even begin to select politicians based on ideology.
So how do we sever them without getting people in there to do that? I mean, how do we how do we get there?
That is a really, really good question. And that is the real challenge. We have to get people in there. You know, that's the problem, is you sort of have to play the game in order to defeat the game, right? Like you've got to play it all the way to the very end until you defeat it completely. And then write your own rules, I guess. And so we have to start electing candidates where their sole focus is money out of politics. And it's got to be And I think that needs to be the message that all of us need to have going forward. We need to unite in this one message. And we could say, look, you and I can disagree on the medical stuff. You and I could disagree on the ideology of whether or not the government should subsidize in order to encourage certain behaviors by the public, or if the government should completely stay out of it, right? We can have those debates later. We can disagree on those now. The one thing we need to agree on, and we need to just say, look, we're only going to vote for the candidate who says, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to vote to completely unravel the money grip that corporations have on our politics. And we have to unite around that message. And if we can all agree on that and say, I don't care if you're left, right, center, I don't care. We need to agree on this one thing. And we need to go in there and hand these politicians their asses and say, you're done, we're in, and we're dismantling this money system. And we're going to bring the government back to the American people. And then once we give it back to the American people, guess what? The American people are going to decide what kind of society they want to live in. And we don't know yet because they haven't been able to choose for the longest time.
Yeah, so I got an interesting question for you. The people who campaign the hardest on getting money out of politics, most of those people are the ones who voted for the CARES Act or voted for the stimulus bill at Christmas time. The ones that you can consistently see voting against this are the libertarian ones.
Right.
Rand Paul, Justin Amash, Thomas Massey, and their opinion on money in politics, it mostly comes down to transparency usually. So if we're uniting behind candidates who want to get money out of politics, but they don't end up doing that, what's the point? Like everyone who, everyone who has made that such a central point of their campaign, most of them just sold us out and just did it anyway, where the libertarian minded ones are actually the only ones who have really stood up for us at all this time.
Yeah. I think the reason for that is because it's not the loudest message in the room. It is a message, and it's a message that's sort of growing. But at this point, it's not the loudest message in the room. And until it is the message, and until people are willing to actually hold the politicians accountable, and they need to understand what that means. They think, well, let's vote Joe Biden in and then let's hold him accountable. It's like, no, that's not the way it works. The way you hold them accountable is you don't let them in office. You make them lose their job. That's how you hold them accountable. And so I think what needs to happen is it needs to be the loudest message, and they need to be afraid of losing their jobs, because we, the people, say, if you continue to take corporate money and if you don't rewrite the rules, for one, like what I want done are 2 rules totally rewritten in there. I want the rule of money, how the campaigns are funded, completely changed. And I also want ballot access to be completely changed and that needs to be handed down state by state needs to do it. But those 2 things need to really change. If we could change ballot access and all this, the rules around ballot access, and we could actually have a viable 3rd party or 4th party or 5th party or 6th parties even that rise up. Well, we'd also need a little bit of electoral college reform on that, because at this point you have to get 270 to win. So even if there's 5 parties running, one of them has to get 270. That always ultimately reduces us down to a 2-party system. But, not totally necessarily. I mean, France has it similar. They have like a similar system, but they have a giant election where there's like 10 different parties running. And then the last 2, it kind of dwindles down to the final 2, and people have to sort of choose. So it is a little bit like ranked choice voting in some ways, sort of. A different way of doing it, but I think that could work too. But we have to dismantle that system a bit. In order to really, truly allow the American people choices in the political system. And that just has to be the loudest message in the room. And right now, the loudest message in the room is racism, right? That's the only thing anybody's talking about. They're like, yeah, but all of these racists. And it's bullshit. It's not real. It's not true. I sit there and I ask people, how many white supremacists do you actually know? Like, list them. If there's such a threat, and you think it's half the country and it's like knocking on your door today, then tell me who these people are so we can go, let's list them. Let's put their picture up and name them, I guess. But they can't. They're like, no, I just know they're there.
Yeah, I don't know if you know who Dave Smith is, but I had him on my show a couple of days ago and we were talking about that. If you look at who is backing all this like dangerous white supremacist narratives, it's all the people who are benefiting off of what's going on, because they're they're just making a distraction to throw the scent off of the actual corruption that's taking place. They're getting people to look at a boogeyman that doesn't really exist.
And it's been the narrative of this country since the dawn of time. They've used racism forever, whether it be a racist or now don't be a racist. But either way, it's been racism has controlled the narrative to allow the rich to continue getting wealthier and wealthier. And it's crazy that people don't see this. I mean, they sit there and say, no, we'll deal with the wealth problem later. We've got this racism issue today. And it's like, through time, the wealthy have only become wealthier because of this. It's not slowing down. It's not, plateauing or even reversing. They're getting richer. And it's because we continue to buy into these narratives of either be a racist, back in the day, be a racist or don't be a racist. Either way, racism dominates the conversation in this country, and it's such a distraction. It's a huge, it's not the thing we need to focus on.
Yeah. So to kind of bring this back to what I was originally trying to dissect is when I was working on Tulsi's campaign, there was a chunk of issues I disagreed with her on, and I was trying to bring people in to vote for her, and they wouldn't do it because of a chunk of issues. And I was like, yeah, but you agree with her on all this important stuff. And they're like, yeah, but this one's a deal breaker for me. And, then when, the primary ended and she dropped out and everything, I went over to the Libertarian Party and I was trying to get people to vote for Joe Jorgensen. And it was the same thing. It was like, okay, yeah, I agree with her on the wars and the Patriot Act and, all this stuff, but I don't agree with her on like these couple things. And it was just so aggravating to me because we've got these huge central issues that are causing us so much strife and so much pain and destroying this country. And we're letting a lot of the kind of fringe stuff drive us apart. So to me, what has to happen is we have to unite around like 6 central issues or something that
maybe really, even less than that, like 3 or 4.
Yeah. I mean, I'll take 3 or 4.
Right.
So I wanted to talk with you about what those issues are. You've already brought up a few. These are just some ideas I have.
Okay.
And some people are going to, I want to get into the lockdowns later, just because you've been so good on that. But that's one issue, end the lockdowns. I think a lot of people could agree on that. End the wars, end or audit the Fed and end corporate bailouts, end the war on drugs, end massive surveillance, and election reform. And, election reform that would encompass getting money out of politics, like you just discussed.
Yeah.
What else would you add to that? Would you take any of that away? What do you think need to be the central issues that we can actually get a lot of people to unite on?
I think those are good. I mean, I definitely think those are, money out of politics, election reform, ending, ending corporate control of our government in however way you want to phrase that. Yeah, I mean, I think those are all really, really good. I just think that the issue is, I just think there's too many people that will prioritize like Medicare for all, or they'll prioritize the Second Amendment or abortion issues, and so they get into these issues that really, those issues are issues that you and I can have ideological discussions about once we get our government back. Right. But we don't even have control of our government. So we could sit here and disagree on all these ideological issues all day long. It doesn't matter because we're not making decisions.
That's what they want us to do. They want us to argue over abortion and gun control and, the Green New Deal or whatever, right, while they get all these corporate bailouts, while they reap the benefits of these lockdowns, and we don't unite against them because we're fighting with each other.
Yeah, they just want us to think like it's all the morality stuff. So that's why it's the racism stuff, it's the abortion stuff, it's the guns, it's the, it's all of these things. And we are not able as a society to run our society right now. And until we understand that, until that is like beaten into everybody's head that you cannot, we are not in control of our government. So it doesn't matter if you and I disagree on everything. Right. We're not making any of the decisions. So what we need is we first need to get control of our government so that then we can argue all day.
Right.
And then we can sit there and, throw them out at each other and being like, yeah, you're wrong. We could turn but we don't even have the luxury of disagreeing and arguing in heated debates about these things in a way that actually matters. We don't have that choice.
Yeah, I mean, the goal is to get back to a place where I would be supporting Tulsi Gabbard's opponent, right? Because of what I disagree with her on, versus
Right.
the fact that right now I agree with her on 80% of the stuff, and it's so much more important than the stuff we disagree on. The goal is to get to where we can start arguing about all this
right.
all this stuff.
Right. And that's what people need to understand is I want to be able to argue with you and disagree with you in a way that's actually meaningful and matters, right? In a way that if you and I can convince the population to of your point of view or my point of view, when they vote, it will actually result in what they wanted when they voted. But right now that doesn't happen. Right now it's what do the corporate overlords want? And ultimately they keep us fighting over all of these things and they don't do anything about them ever because their corporate overlords say, no, keep that issue going because we need that. We can't solve that problem. We need to keep it going because we need those people to continue yelling at each other and distracted by that issue so that we can then continue to do all these other things and suck up all the money from the American people.
Yeah.
And from people all around the world, quite frankly.
Yeah. So I'll just be honest, this probably won't surprise you. I have zero interest in the People's Party. And when they first announced it, I was like, okay, I'll take a look at it. And I looked at it, and to me, it was just like a more extreme Green Party. There's no desire to bring people from the right at all. If you're a Second Amendment guy or something, it certainly doesn't seem like there's any room for you there. It's like a more closed-minded approach to a progressive party. So I think I think you're right when you say that we need to put aside the moral issues, like trying to draw one half of society as evil and the other half as benevolent. That's really counterproductive. So libertarianism to me is the only ideology that draws from both sides. It has the social aspects of the left, which at least used to be like tolerance, and then it has a lot of the economic sides of the right, which are live and let live. But neither the left nor the right have any of those aspects anymore. Now the right is just completely corporate, and so is the left, and then the left is like completely intolerant of anything that they don't agree with. But I'm trying to get people together in a movement that's actually going to end all of these destructive policies. And in the Libertarian Party, we've had a lot of issues in the past with people being ideologues and not willing to bend on anything and putting every single party platform at the top. Every single issue matters equally. Mm-hmm. That's bullshit. So there are a lot of us who are trying to centralize the message around like 5 or 6 issues that most Americans can agree on. And then once we remove these assholes, then we can argue. So I hear you talking a lot about third parties, and I've heard you criticize the People's Party, and you've said the Green Party and the Libertarian Party, they're all fringe parties. What are your thoughts right now? Like, what do you look at as a viable venue for change?
Yeah, I don't think a third party is ever going to work, unfortunately, with the way the system runs. I actually was in the process of writing a book on how to start a third party successfully. And in my research found it was impossible. And it was actually very depressing to come to that conclusion, because I think there is a lot of hope for a lot of people that we can rise up together and have a third party and have it actually work out. I mean, it maybe could work, if there was a party that could rise up and be that third party viable option. It would have to be the Libertarian Party, because the Libertarian Party, I believe, has more ballot access than any of the other parties at this. I think, does the Libertarian Party have ballot access in all 50 states or just like 47 of them, though? No, I don't think it's every state.
It's been all 50 the last 2 elections.
Okay. So if there was going to be one rise up, it would have to be the Libertarian Party at this point because of the ballot access issue. But the Libertarian Party would have to drastically change its ideology in order to attract all the people necessary to be a viable, and in order for it to be a viable third party option, it has to be the biggest of the parties. So it has to be larger than the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. It would have to be larger than. So the only way to do that is, you'd have the potentially changing the name. I don't know if that would even be allowed I'd have to look at the ballot access rules. Like, are you allowed to re-register as a different name, in order to, and maintain that ballot access? And maybe it could be something like the Liberty, whatever party, right? But just changing it a bit so that it doesn't have the connotation of libertarianism, because those of us that, I just don't agree with libertarians on economic issues, really. So that's going to be a hard pill for a lot of people to say, okay, I'll just go become a libertarian. No one's going to, people just aren't going to do that. So it's the same problem with the People's Party is the problem I have with the Libertarian Party, is the problem I have with the Green Party. It's icing out really a big portion of the population that would be necessary in order to have a true third party option that's actually going to potentially defeat candidates in races. So I think that, if it's going to happen, it would happen in the Libertarian Party, but the other two parties are so entrenched and they have such a grip that even libertarians ultimately have to run as Republicans in order to gain seats. They're not even able to really run as libertarians and win seats as libertarians. So I think the reform, unfortunately, does have to happen inside the two major parties that are existing right now. And we saw that fail on the Democratic side. The Democratic
side.
Well, I don't know. I think the Republican side, it's still possible. I still think there's a chance over there because I don't think they know who they are anymore. And I think here's the thing about the Republican Party. Let me make this argument.
Go ahead.
We saw a chink in the armor. The Democratic Party did not allow that chink in the armor to actually open a pathway for Bernie Sanders to win. They fortified themselves and said no way in hell, and they just made sure that didn't happen. The Republican side, on the other hand, there was a chink in the armor, and something got loose, right? And suddenly Donald Trump was president, and that took them all by surprise. And so I think that they've shown that they're not that strong, and that there's a possibility for outsiders or even outside thought to infiltrate the party and take hold and actually be or become the mainstream thinking on that side of the party, on that side of the aisle. So I still actually think there's a chance that the Republican Party right now, going through a major existential crisis, I don't think that their establishment is going to be able to gain back the grip of the Republican Party that the Democratic Party was able to do. I don't think we're going to see, like another Bush become president, just like Joe Biden was able to do it. And they were able to get back into that Clinton Obama era Democratic Party. I don't see that happening with the Republican side. I don't think they're going to get Liz Cheney as president or, a Bush, or I just don't see that happening over there. So I think there's actually a possibility to go in there and infiltrate and make some change. It would be very drastic and they wouldn't know what hit them, but I think it's possible.
Yeah, the thing with the Republican side, and I used to be a Republican, and I left just because I was so disgusted with how the party was. We had Ron Paul, and they didn't treat, they were worse to Tulsi Gabbard than Ron Paul, but it was a similar treatment. I mean, with him, they tried to make him a joke instead of a traitor, or a racist or whatever. That's how they went after him, and they kept him out of polls. They did a lot of the same things they did to Tulsi. He was just way more popular, so they couldn't suppress him as much. But
that was then, was then. This is now.
With Trump, I'm not sure anything actually changed other than rhetoric, because you didn't really see any policies change. And the people were fine with that. You know, he would even like say he was going to veto this last giant bill that came through and everyone was cheering him on, and then he signed it and there wasn't really any huge outcry over that. You know, he said he was going to end the wars. He said he was going to drain the swamp. He said he was going to do all this stuff.
Right.
And he didn't do much of any of it. And they still loved him. So I'm not sure that it's a deep enough chink in the armor to actually change people's hearts. It's just that they were excited about his rhetoric. So,
but don't you think they could become excited about another outsider's rhetoric? I mean, I think that they're moldable. So that's what I'm saying is they didn't snap back to Mitch McConnell. That's what they didn't do. Whereas look what the Democrats did. They were able to get everybody to snap back to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and back to the Clintons. You know, they were able to co-opt everybody, even the most outspoken. And yet the Republican side is not seeing that. I think any of them, you know, they're not able to just snap back to the days of, you know, like the Democratic Party, they could talk crap about Bernie Sanders and nobody handed them their asses. Nobody, right? They still got elected in. Right. But the Republican side, I think if they talk smack about Donald Trump, it wouldn't work. I think they would be voted out. And so that, you know, that's why I think there's a chance to actually go in there and make some real change. And I think any new candidate that comes forward on the Republican side would be one that would have to take on Donald Trump's talking points, but this time around, actually implement them. Mm-hmm. So if they went in there and said, that's it, we're going to end the wars, we're going to drain the swamp, we're going to get rid of this corporatocracy that's going on and the corporate grip by big tech and all of this, that is clearly a message that is resonating with the Republican base. And they're not snapping back to they're trying. I mean, I see it all the time in the media, and we're even hearing Democrats try to, you know, it's so ridiculous, right? We're hearing these liberals that are saying, we need to get the Republican Party back to what it used to be, the good party, right? Like, when did they ever think the Republican Party was good? They never called it the party of patriots or the party of morality, but suddenly now, we need to get that back to the party of morality. You know, the party that marches us into endless wars and kills hundreds of thousands of people. That's what we got to do. Mm-hmm. So they're trying their damnedest to try to get Democrats and establishment Republicans are trying to get that narrative out there. And I just don't think that re-propagandizing is working at all with the Republican base, unlike the Democratic base. They figured it out. The Democrats figured out all they had to do was cry racism. Right. And then everybody would snap into place. It's not going to work on the Republican side. Like, what could be the message that they could use? Because that was the only way the Democrats were able to do it. They had to go extreme, and they had to say everybody on that side is a white nationalist. And unless you vote for us, you're with them and you're on the wrong side of history. You're siding with Nazis, right? So what would be the message possibly that the Mitch McConnell, Liz Cheney, Bush era Republicans, the Meghan McCain's out there, who, by the way, Tulsi's cozying way too close to for my liking. I hate it.
Anything with the last name McCain gives me the
well, and I just know Meghan McCain is a you know, she's just a regular Republican who wants the Republican Party to go back to the way it was. And also I've seen how she treats. I used to work in the same, her and I did radio shows across the hall from one another, and I saw how she treated her staff. I was very turned off by that. So I don't know why Tulsi's hanging out with her or buddying up with her, somebody that treats people that she believes are lower than her like crap. Mm-hmm. And I've seen it for my own eye. Maybe she's changed, you know, let's hope she's found God or something and she's reformed. I don't know, but, and you know, anything's possible, but, you know, they're trying to get it back to that old Republican guard. And, I just don't think they're going to be able to do it. I don't know what message all of them could come together with on the Republican side to get every Republican, including all these Trump supporters, to suddenly snap back into place. What could they possibly say?
Well, just like you could say what you said about the Mormons because you were a Mormon, I think I can shit talk the Republicans because I used to be one. I think that this is going to sound extremely demeaning, but I think it's really true that Republicans are skin deep on a lot of issues. Like, they really don't care about policies. That's why they liked Tulsi. I mean, I liked Tulsi because I agreed with her on most things. A lot of Republicans liked her because she said the Pledge of Allegiance during her town halls, and she was in the military. If you went like down the issues, there'd be a lot, like very little that they'd actually agree with her on. So I think all they have to do is get someone like Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is like, he's anti a lot of the same things they are in rhetoric. And if they choose Ted Cruz, I don't think the establishment is going to fear Ted Cruz at all. I mean, he wants to do a lot of the same things they want to do. He's a warmonger.
Right. He's establishment. Yeah.
But I think he could do it easily.
Well, we'll find out. I don't think so. I think the base has totally changed. I think their mentality has changed and their eyes are a bit more open. So I don't think even Ted Cruz could do it. And I think what we'll find out, really. I mean, 4 years from now is really going to be the test. It was the same thing for the Democratic Party. I mean, for 4 years after the Sanders, Clinton scandal in 2016, they had 4 years of seeing the rise of even more progressivism in their party. Bernie didn't become less popular from 2016. He became more popular from 2016 to 2020. And so they knew this narrative was like going and gaining in popularity. And 2020 was that's when it became clear that the Democratic establishment still very much had their claws in on the party. And I think, in 4 years is when we'll find out really with the Republican Party, how entrenched is that establishment? And are they going to be had again by somebody else who comes forward that is an outsider that speaks, like I think, Candace Owens said she might run for president. I actually think she'd probably do really well on the Republican side. Yeah. And I think they would resent that and they would hate that and they would try to demonize her just like they did Trump. And, trying to say, oh, here she is somehow a white supremacist, sexist, I don't know, misogynist, like Candace Owens, like whatever, right? I don't know what they'll say, yeah. But, I think with that party, I think if you stuck Candace Owens next to Ted Cruz, I have a hard time believing Ted Cruz would actually beat her in a primary.
Yeah. So,
and that's that's what I'm saying is like, that's what we'll find out in 4 years with the Republican Party versus the Democrats. Well, they cheat. So, I think Bernie was winning all of the primaries, but wasn't allowed. Iowa was a scandal. And, so I don't know that. So we'll see if the Republicans cheat. I don't think the Republicans will. I think they're too moral. I think in that way they are a little, they're like, oh crap. I mean, I think they'll gerrymander, they'll do all kinds of other things, but I don't know if they'll full on like really.
They sort of did to Ron Paul in Iowa in 2012. It wasn't quite as bad as what the Democrats did this last time around, but they dabble in it. But they aren't outright crooks on the election like the Democrats are. I'll give you that.
Right.
But, so even if like Candace Owens wins, I don't see how that helps you or me at all. I mean, like Candace Owens, if she becomes president, I'm struggling to see what we've accomplished, I guess. I mean, because we get just because you get an outsider in, if she's just completely pro-police, doesn't want drugs legalized, doesn't want to end the wars, like,
right,
what?
Right. Well, as long as she wants to get money out of politics, like that to me is the number one issue. So if she goes in there and if everybody who votes for her continues to resonate a message that says, what we want from you is to go in there and drain the swamp, and the way to drain it, end the corporate hold on our government. And we want freedom of speech and we want all these freedoms back because the corporations are controlling everything. And if she really were to, and I think she does care about that quite a bit, actually. I think she does care about the freedom of speech and the censorship issue. So I think if she were going to go in there and say, well, the way we dismantle this is get rid of the money aspect, that's a win ultimately. I mean, maybe she doesn't agree on all these other things, but again, those things are voter issues. Like if we want to end the wars and end the war on drugs, we need to vote those things. And the way we can vote those things finally is if we get the money out of politics. Then you and I can have ideological debates about should we have legalized marijuana or not. But we can't even have, it doesn't matter, right? Because of big tobacco and, all these other big money interests that are in the way of voters making decisions. And the other thing that gets in the way is people not respecting voters' decisions, right? Voters have, in certain parts of the country want to run their communities the way they want to run them. And others want to force them into living in a different way of life, which I don't agree with. I've lived all around the country. I've lived in, 11 states or something. And so I've seen every part of the country and how people live. And I don't think we should be controlling each other. I'm very more of a states' rights person in that way.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard about Kristi Noem. I think you did a video on it actually. Kristi Noem in South Dakota, they voted to legalize marijuana, and they're overturning the decision with taxpayer dollar funded lawsuits. I'm just like,
yeah. I mean, it's terrible, and that's what happened in Florida, right? And then Ron DeSantis went in there and said, no, the voters voted to decriminalize marijuana, and you guys need to do it because that's what they voted for. So, we need somebody like a Ron DeSantis, I think. I don't agree with Ron DeSantis on a lot of issues, but I agree with him on a lot of issues. So I would be very supportive of a Ron DeSantis running.
mm-hmm.
I think that's a guy that actually would have my best interest in mind.
Mm-hmm.
I might not agree with him on what he thinks my best interest is sometimes, but I think he genuinely wants to do what's right by the people. Mm-hmm. And he's shown that over and over in Florida, where he, the minute he got in there and he said, I mean, really, it was like the month he got into office, he said they voted to decriminalize weed, whether you want to do it or, it doesn't matter what your personal points are. That's what the voters wanted. And that's what we're going to give them.
Yeah.
That's what we need, is somebody who's going to go in there and say, it's not up to you.
Yeah. So I the Libertarian Party deserves nobody's attention because we haven't done anything to gain it. But if we do become a reckonable force in the next couple of years, do you see any hope? And I know you don't agree with the fundamentals of libertarian economics, but if we can unite on ending the current economic system that exists of, the fascist corporate oligarchs running everything, do you think that we could form an alliance temporarily just to kick them out and then disagree afterward?
I think it would take a lot of good PR to do it, but I think it's possible. I think there just needs to be, I don't know, because you know what? I've lost a lot of hope with people on the Democratic side of the aisle. I just think that they've gone insane.
Yeah,
they've gone insane, and I don't think that they can think clearly in that way anymore. I mean, so that's why I say, in order for a third party to rise up, we need to be able to get defectors on both sides in order to join together and to create a big third party, let's say if it's going to be the Libertarian. And that isn't going to happen unless you could get somebody like, let's say you could get a Nina Turner, who's like super far left on the, and for her to suddenly say, okay, I'm going to join the Libertarian Party, and because we're going to get money out of politics, and this is the only way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you get a big named Democrat to take a bunch of people with them and say, we're just going to get together on this one issue, and that's what we're going to do, then I don't think it would work, because people are so brainwashed on that side. I thought they would calm down after Trump lost, and they have gotten worse. Over there. They've become more rabid.
Yeah, the problem is it's not even issue related, right? It's not policy, it's just optics. That's what they're freaking out about. So
yeah,
I mean, even if the Libertarian Party suddenly endorsed Medicare for all, it wouldn't matter, right? Because it's the Libertarian Party, and it's
right. Well, and they just won't work with white supremacists, is what they they're saying. I won't caucus with these white supremacists, these white nationalists. There's no way. And then when lately, I've been trying to kind of sound the alarm about hate crimes against Asians.
Right.
And the hate crimes are not being perpetuated by white supremacists. That's just not the stats. The data is it's being perpetuated by mostly young Black males against Asians. And, saying that it falls on deaf ears. They make a lot of excuses instead. They're so quick to say any crime against, by a white person against a person of color is obviously a white supremacist who's a Trump supporter. And any crime that is a Black male against somebody, that's not Black, like an Asian or a white or something, they say, no, that's just circumstances, and that's a one-off, or that's, they make excuses. Mm-hmm. I even had a really frustrating conversation yesterday with a dear friend of mine who is absolutely hated Donald Trump. and, basically sat there and made excuses to me about the $2 billion of damage that happened across the country over the summer, which was the most damage. The insurance company said that the insurance companies all claimed that it was the highest number, like the most expensive insurance claims that ever in reported history, the $2 billion, up to $2 billion of damage all across the country. And, he was like, no, the Capitol riot was terrible. And how dare you even make an excuse for it? But everything that happened over the summer was just people angry. They were hurting and they were crying out for help. And so that's why they went and smashed like my family's business. That's why my family's business was destroyed. Asian, Vietnamese family, our businesses were destroyed, but that's because they were angry at white people.
Right.
So, and that's so, and I sat there and I was like trying to say, I don't understand this logic here. Like, you're saying it's okay for my family's business to be destroyed one way or the other, but it's not, but so you're saying that what happened at the Capitol was terrible and horrific. And these people all, they're all white supremacy, it's all really bad, but what happened to my family is okay and excusable. I don't understand how anyone can actually say that with a straight face, but they are. And it's so delusional. I just don't know if there's any helping these people right now. I thought they would get better. I really thought they would get better, and they're worse.
Yeah, well,
so,
I agree. And this is, I guess we'll close on this, but I told you before we started recording, I have so much respect for you because you are the only person on the left who was against the lockdowns when it wasn't popular. I mean, now it's slowly becoming more popular. Like, I've seen Jimmy Dore even say like, it might have been a mistake. And, some other people. you were saying that when I was saying it, almost a year ago now. And, this is related to the racism thing. This has been a cause that corporate right-wing America has been able to hijack because progressives have fallen in line behind it. So many progressives have supported the lockdowns, and they've been supporting them from an idealistic point of view. They're like, well, I support the lockdowns, but I support, UBI and Medicare for all and stimulus payments, blah, 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 blah. And you've been the only sane person who's been saying, well, none of that stuff is coming. So pull your head out of the sand, get real. And
none of that stuff would even work because there's a massive, millions and millions upon people, millions of people who have to work in order to allow all of us to sit in front of our computers. It was to me so insane to hear the very same people who are saying racism is our problem and we have to protect people of color, then throw those very people under the bus and say, but you need to go to work while I shelter in place. And you need to go cook my food at the restaurant and then deliver it to me through Grubhub and leave your kids at home, while they try to study from home for internet that you probably don't have, on computers you don't own. It was so privileged.
Right.
And it was the largest display of privilege for these people to be like, no, if everybody just got money from the government. And it's like, what is that? How does that actually help the cook in the kitchen? How does that help the person at the grocery store? How does that help like the person who has to put labels on the food at the factory, or who have to grow the food or package the food or ship the food or get it? All of these things have to continue happening. And that is an entire underground economy filled with a lot of, blue collar workers, many of them people of color. And they just completely were like, okay, but just give everybody money and everybody will be able to shelter in place. No, they wouldn't. And they know that they wouldn't have been able to. So to me, it was just privileged more than anything, and unrealistic. It's like, so what? The government can give these people $1 million. You still need to go to the grocery store and get food. Even if they're paying the checker $1 million, what do you think is going to happen? Somebody's still got to be there.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think we'll be proven. I mean, we already have been proven to be right. But anyone who follows me, you should be watching Kim Iversen's videos. The videos she's done on the lockdowns and the repercussions of them, and then comparing different countries and how they've reacted and what the results were from the way they reacted. It's all very informative stuff.
Well, thank you.
But hey, Kim, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I'll just give you the last word where anyone can go follow what you're doing. I know you've left Twitter, you're on Facebook still and YouTube and some other places. So just
Yeah.
everyone where they can go check you out.
Yeah. Well, right now things are a little bit in flux because I've sort of had to move a lot of stuff off of YouTube because I've been heavily censored on YouTube and mostly demonetized. So I had to take down all the lockdown stuff, and I've taken down more of my real controversial stuff that they didn't like all my foreign policy stuff. I'm big on foreign policy. I traveled to the West Bank, saw the occupation for myself. All of that I had to take down. I'm still figuring out where to place it. A lot of it is on Rockfin, and that content, if it's not on YouTube, it is free over there, but people do have to sign up and register with their email address, but it is free to view those videos in particular. But not all of my stuff is over there because I just went over there about a year ago, less than a year ago. So yeah, I'm on, Rockfin, YouTube. My podcast has everything. And yeah, so right now I'm still a little in flux, but soon I'll get everything organized on my website, kimiverson.com, so that people can see everything on the site. And yeah, and I'm just independent. I run mostly on donations and supporters. And so that's it.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on, Kim. We'll have to do it again for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, for sure.